Okay, a further advantage of first past the post is it arguably has the support of the people. Back in 2011, there was a referendum held. The Liberal Democrats pushed for this whilst they're in coalition to change the voting system to get rid of first past the post and replace it with a different system called AV. In that referendum, 67% of people voted to keep the current voting system, which supporters of first past the post say, therefore, this shows that the people support first past the post. However, one little caveat is that only 42% of people actually took part in that referendum. But I suppose a majority of them did say they wanted to keep it. So that's an argument which is made in its favour. Okay, there are certain disadvantages of the current voting system which those who oppose first past the post are particularly keen to highlight. The first one is that some votes count more than others. This might seem a bit strange. It doesn't mean that some people vote twice or anything like that. What it means is that in some parts of the country, people are much more conservative, and in some parts of the country, people are much more Labour. And so if you live in an area which is very, very conservative, where the Conservatives have lots and lots of votes, and you're, say, a Labour voter or a Lib Dem voter, yes, you can vote Labour or Lib Dem, but the Conservatives are always going to win in your area. And you might think, well, does my vote really count? Is it really going to make a difference? Whereas in other bits of the country, some areas are very close, where there's kind of equal numbers of Labour or Conservatives or other parties, and therefore, if you vote, then your vote could actually change who wins that seat because it's down to just a couple of votes. So, to give you an example to illustrate this for you, if we have a look, they call these marginal seats where it's very close between the different parties as to who is likely to win. So, if we have a look here, this is in 2017, this is in Fife, this is just north of Edinburgh. And if we look here, the Scottish National Party, Stephen Gethin's, got 13,743 votes. Liberal Democrat Elizabeth Richards, 13,741. Conservatives, 10,000 and something. Labour, 4,000. This independent guy, 224. You can see here that the SNP won this seat by 2 votes. So if 2 SNP voters had decided not to go to the polling station, then the Liberal Democrats may have just taken this seat. Or if a couple of SNP voters had thought, you know what, I'm going to vote Lib Dem or I'm going to vote Conservative or whatever, it would have changed the result, wouldn't it? If just 2 or 3 Labour people thought, you know what, we don't really like the Lib Dems, but they're better than the SNP, if a couple of those people had voted Lib Dem, it would have led to a Lib Dem victory. So you can see how people's votes really count in this area. I suspect quite a few of those Liberal Democrat votes probably came from Labour, which is about how poorly Labour are in that particular seat, but I can't prove that. But your vote really counts. The main parties in the next election in 2019 would have spent quite a lot of time in that seat trying to convince people to vote for them. You can imagine SNP leaflets, can't you, saying, it's crucial if you support Scottish independence and support Scotland that you vote for us. Don't vote Lib Dem because that's a vote for the Conservatives or whatever. Vote for us. You can imagine the Lib Dems going around and saying, look, it's only 2 votes in it. Vote for us and we can stop those horrible SNP people. So your vote would really count if you live in that area. Now, if you take another seat, this is down in the south of England. This is Hampshire, which is on the south coast. You can see here the Conservative guy, Ranil something, got 37,754. Barry Jones Labour, 9,982, etc., etc. He has a majority of 27,000. People are not going to really bother about your vote too much there, are they? If you're a Labour voter living in Hampshire North East, you might think, what's the point of voting? Because the Conservatives are going to win here. I might as well just stay inside and finish watching EastEnders. Likewise, if you're a Lib Dem or a Green voter, you might have those same views. People are not going to try and court your vote in Hampshire North East because The Labour Party are not going to put a big campaign in Hampshire because they know the Conservatives are going to win. The Conservatives are probably not going to put a big campaign in Hampshire because they know unless there's some great big disaster, they're going to win that particular seat. So your vote in Hampshire does not count as much. It's not going to change the result as it would if you lived in Fife North East, where just a couple of votes in it. So you could argue this is really unfair, because how come, depending on where you live, your vote might change the result or might not change the result? So that's an argument made against first past the post. Another issue is something called tactical voting. This is where people, like we were saying before, looking at the SNP, Liberal Democrat and Labour and stuff in Fife, people think, you know what, I'm really a Labour voter, but I don't want the SNP to win, so I'm going to vote Lib Dem, even though I don't really like the Lib Dems, but they're better than the SNP, in order to try and stop the SNP from winning. If I give another example, this is Cheltenham, down in Gloucestershire. You can see here, Conservatives, Alex Chalk, 26,615, Martin Horwood, Liberal Democrat, 24,046, Keith White, Labour, 5,000, Greens, 943. Again, it's one of those marginal seats, isn't it? It's only 2,500 votes in it, so it's not many people needs to, switch sides. Now, if you're not a Conservative or Liberal voter, you might decide how you're going to vote. So, for example, my brother lives in this seat. My brother is a Labour voter. He's not a great fan of Jeremy Corbyn, mind you. But anyway, he's a Labour voter who really dislikes the Conservatives. The question is, what does he do? Does he vote with his conscience and his heart and puts a vote for Labour? But that runs the risk of the Conservatives winning that seat again. Or does he think, you know what, I don't like Alex Chalk, I don't want him to win. I'm not a huge fan of the Liberal Democrats, but they are better than the Conservatives. So I'm not going to vote Labour, which is what my first choice would be. I'm going to vote Liberal Democrat as well. And if a few more Labour people did that, that could mean that the Conservatives would lose in Cheltenham. And the same must be true for people like the Green parties and other small parties. They tend to vote tactically. Quite a lot of, in 2015, UKIP, as we know, got lots of votes in the European elections of the year before, which are proportional. But in the general election, a lot of UKIP people seem to have voted Conservative because they thought the Conservatives dislike Europe, not as much as we do, but they don't seem to like the Conservatives, and we don't want to risk a Labour government because, they won't let us have our referendum. So again, this is called tactical voting, where people decide tactically they're not going to vote for who they would like to vote for, they're going to vote for a different party in order to defeat someone who they dislike even more. And again, you might say, is that really very democratic, that people are being forced to vote in these tactical ways? And as I said before, look at this in Fife, we said before, you can imagine some of those Labour voters voting Lib Dem, can't you, to try and stop the SNP? Or might even imagine some of those Conservatives voting Lib Dem to stop the SNP in that particular seat. Okay, other disadvantages. A significant number of MPs get less than 50% of the vote. So, if we go back to what we were looking at before, these two people here did not get 50% of the vote in their seat. They got one more vote or more than their nearest rival, but that does not mean they got 50%. So in other words, in Cheltenham, if you add up 24,000, 5,000 and 1,000, that comes to more than 26,615. In other words, more people voted against Alex Chalk, but their vote was split between these three people. If you were just Conservative and Liberal Democrats, then it is possible the Lib Dems may have won this seat because they would have got 24,000 plus 5,000 plus 1,000. Probably. Same is true here in Fife, isn't it? Okay, the guy won by 2 votes. So if you add up, Liz Rich's, Tony's, Rosalind's and Mike's votes, there would have been a lot more than what Stephen Gethin's got. So these two MPs did not get 50% of the vote in their seat. They got less than 50% of the vote in their seats. And this is not uncommon in this voting system. But a consequence is, if a lot of MPs don't get 50%, it means that the government does not get 50% of the vote. And that is actually true. if you look at this here, this shows the percent of vote each party got and the percent of seats each party got in 2015. So in 2015, the Conservatives in this lighter blue got 36.9% of the vote. So just over a third of people in Britain voted Conservative. But they actually won 51%, just under, of all the seats in Westminster. So in other words, they won quite a lot of seats with just a very small majority, like of 1,000 or 500 or something like that. So it had a disproportionate impact on the number of seats the Conservatives got. Labour are the same. They got 30% of the vote, but 35% of seats. And what you tend to find is that first past the post helps these two big parties. Because their vote is quite deep in places, like in the cities for Labour or the countryside for Conservatives, they don't need to fight those seats, and so they only need to win a number of seats by a small majority, and they actually win a lot of seats in the House of Commons. Smaller parties find it more tricky. The Scottish National Party, across the country, they gain 4.7% of the vote and 8% of seats. And this is because all their vote is concentrated in one area, i.e. Scotland. The Lib Dems, and this is how I'm showing about small parties don't do as well with this system, they got 8% of the vote just under and only 1% of the seats. So in other words, they must have come second in quite a lot of places, or a good third, like what we saw on the previous slide in Cheltenham and in Fife, where they came second in both. But becoming a good second doesn't count. It's seats which you need to win which counts. UKIP, famously, 12% of the vote and only one MP, 0.2% of seats, and again have a similar picture here for the Greens. So this system leads to government not having majorities. So government's not winning the most votes. I don't think a government's actually won 50% of the vote since 1951. The current government's got about 43% of the vote, I think they achieved. I don't know what percent of seats they've got, but it must be about 60% of seats. And this shows that this system's really unfair to small parties. Okay, I'm going to run out of free time. I'm going to have to do a part 3 on this video.